The elevator opened on the 52nd floor at 7:43 inches the morning, and Daniel Hayes stepped out carrying two things: a portfolio case under his left arm and a thermos of coffee grown cold during the 40-minute commute from Brooklyn. He had forgotten to reheat it. He always forgot. Aurora Tech Tower wore the season well. Someone in facilities management had strung warm Edison bulbs along the corridor windows, and beyond the glass, the city of New York was performing its annual December theater scaffolding draped in tinsel, cabs threading between horse-drawn carriages, pedestrians bent against a wind that smelled of roasted chestnuts and exhaust. From 52 floors up, it looked almost peaceful. Daniel knew better than to trust peaceful things. He set his portfolio on his desk in the creative wing, nodded to a few colleagues already hunched over their monitors, and pulled up his calendar. The 9 a.m. leadership presentation was still there, unmoved, as immovable as a geological feature. He had spent 11 days building the campaign for the Solstice launch Aurora Tech's flagship winter product reveal, scheduled for December 21st. 11 days of late evenings and one missed school recital and approximately 400 text messages to his neighbor, Mrs. Paulson, who watched his daughter Lily on the nights when the office swallowed him whole. Lily was 7. She had drawn him a picture that now lived in the corner of his monitor. A house with a yellow door and two stick figures, one tall and one small, both with red scarves. She had labeled them Tyler's Daddy and Times Lillian, her careful, looping handwriting. He glanced at it now, steadied himself. At 8:55, he gathered his materials and walked toward Conference Room A. The room was large and cold in the way of rooms that are meant to project authority, floor-to-ceiling glass walls. A table long enough to seat 20. A presentation screen wide enough to fill a cinema. The senior leadership team was already seated. Marcus Webb, the CFO, sorting through a bound report. Christine Holloway from legal, already on her phone. Philip Drake, the COO, making a joke to no one in particular. And Sandra Ellison from marketing, who gave Daniel a small, tight smile that said, "Times good luck in the way people say it when they mean times you'll need it." Asterisk. Victoria Sterling arrived at precisely 9. She wore charcoal, she almost always wore charcoal, and she carried nothing, which meant everything was already in her head. She was 38 years old, had built Aurora Tech from a 12-person startup operating out of a midtown sublease into a company employing nearly 4,000 people across 6 time zones, and she moved through rooms as though the architecture had been designed specifically to accommodate her. Not arrogance, exactly. Something colder than that. Efficiency, the elimination of unnecessary motion. She took her seat at the head of the table without greeting anyone and looked at Daniel. "Mr. Hayes, proceed." He proceeded. For the first 7 minutes, it went well. The campaign was strong, he knew it was strong. The visual language was elegant, the messaging layered, the seasonal imagery calibrated to evoke warmth without sentiment. His team had worked hard. He was proud of them. Then Victoria leaned forward. "Stop," she said. He stopped. Slide 14. She didn't gesture toward the screen. She didn't need to. The tagline. Asterisk. Light finds a way. Walk me through the research behind that choice. It tested well in the consumer panels. 82% positive association across the 25 to 40 demographic. 82% is not a number. It's a comfort blanket. Her voice was flat, precise, the verbal equivalent of a scalpel. What does Times Light Finds a Way actually say about our product? What does it distinguish? Nothing. It could be a slogan for a flashlight. It could be a motivational poster in a dentist's office. Around the table, no one moved. The product itself creates light, Daniel said carefully. The tagline draws on that. The product creates time's adaptive chromatic resonance. It is the most technically sophisticated piece of consumer lighting ever brought to market. And your tagline sounds like it belongs on a greeting card. She sat back. What else? He flipped to the next slide. She found something wrong with that one too, and the one after. By slide 20, she had dismantled the presentation with the methodical focus of someone disassembling a clock, not out of anger, but out of what appeared to be a genuine and total indifference to the 11 days his team had poured into this. That was when something in Daniel Hayes broke loose. He set his tablet down. "Miss Sterling." She looked at him. "3 members of my team haven't seen their families in 2 weeks. One of them missed his son's birthday. One of them is showing early symptoms of burnout that HR has flagged twice already. They built something extraordinary, and you just spent 20 minutes telling them it belongs in a dentist's office." He kept his voice level, but only just. "That's not feedback. That's not leadership. That is exactly the kind of management that is going to cost this company the people it cannot afford to lose." The room had gone absolutely, completely still. Victoria Sterling looked at him across the length of the table. Her expression did not change. "Are you finished?" she said. "No," said Daniel. "I'm not." What happened next would be reconstructed later, in whispered exchanges by the coffee machine, in the careful language of HR incident reports, and in a group message thread between Sandra Ellison, Philip Drake, and 2 other senior directors that would later be described, in legal terms, as Time's contemporaneous witness documentation. Asterisk. Daniel Hayes said, "This isn't a company right now. It's a pressure cooker with a defective release valve, and you're the one holding it shut." Victoria Sterling said, "You're a creative director, Mr. Hayes, not a labor organizer, not a therapist, not my conscience." "No," he said. "But I am the person responsible for a team that is cracking under policies you implemented without consulting the people closest to the work. The deadline is non-negotiable. The Times human cost is non-negotiable." Marcus Webb made a small, involuntary sound that might have been a suppressed cough or a suppressed prayer. Victoria rose from her chair. She did not do it dramatically, she simply stood, and the room recalibrated around her standing. The way a room recalibrates around a change in atmospheric pressure. "You want to talk about human cost." Her voice had dropped, which was somehow more alarming than if it had risen. "Do you have any understanding of what happens to 4,000 employees if this launch fails? If we miss the window, if we lose the retail partnership, if the investors pull the Q1 funding commitment? The human cost of that outcome, Mr. Hayes, is significantly larger than 2 weeks of overtime. Brilliance without empathy," Daniel said, "is just cruelty with better vocabulary." He hadn't planned to say it. It came from somewhere older than the meeting, older than Aurora Tech, somewhere deep and tired. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Christine Holloway to quietly close her laptop. Victoria was still standing. She was looking at Daniel with an expression that, for the first time in the 2 years he had worked for her, he couldn't read. Not cold, not furious, something else, something that crossed her face like weather crossing a landscape, fast and gone. She walked around the table. The room watched her walk around the table. Daniel stood his ground, because there was nowhere else to stand. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the precise, controlled tension in her jaw. The faint line between her brows that meant the machinery behind her eyes was running at full capacity. She reached up and gripped his tie. Everyone assumed she was going to straighten it, some gesture of condescension, a power move. She kissed him. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. It was not gentle. It was the kind of kiss that carries accumulated words that were never said, furious and deliberate, like a conclusion being forced out of reluctant evidence. Then she released him. The room did not breathe. She leaned in, close enough that only he could hear, and said, "Stop fighting me all the time." Then she walked out. The door didn't slam. That was the part everyone remembered afterward. She closed it quietly, and somehow that was worse. Philip Drake said, eventually. Well, nobody responded. Daniel left at 5:15. He took the stairs, not because the elevator was broken, but because he needed 14 flights of stairs and whatever silence he could find in them. Outside, December had made its full commitment to the cold. The city lights had come on early, and Manhattan was doing what it did best in this season, becoming something almost forgivable. The streets smelled of pine and scorched sugar from a vendor's cart. A group of carolers in matching scarves stood near the Rockefeller steps, performing for an audience of distracted commuters. Daniel stopped for a moment, watching them without hearing them, and then kept walking. He took the subway to Red Hook, transferred once, and arrived at Sparrow's Landing Children's Center at 5:48. Lily was sitting by the window, watching for him. He could see her from the sidewalk, a small shape with dark hair and his own jawline, pressing her palm flat against the glass. When she saw him, she disappeared from the window, and 30 seconds later she came through the door like a controlled detonation, arms wide, backpack swinging. "Daddy." He caught her and held on longer than usual. She permitted this, patting his shoulder with the grave patience of a child who understood that adults sometimes needed managing. "Rough day?" she said, muffled against his coat. "Little bit." She pulled back and studied his face. She had been doing this since she was 5, this careful, forensic examination, as though she was reading something in his expression that hadn't been put into words yet. "The scary boss lady again?" she said. He blinked. "How do you know about her? You talk in your sleep sometimes." She said this without accusation, simply as information. "And your face does a thing when you're worried about work. It goes like this." She demonstrated a compressed, slightly agonized expression that was uncomfortably accurate. They walked to the hot chocolate cart 3 blocks down, because it was Thursday, and Thursday was hot chocolate, a ritual as inviolable as the tides. "She's not really scary," Daniel said, after a while. He wasn't sure why he said it. Lily wrapped both hands around her cup and considered this. Snowflakes were beginning, tentative and exploratory, testing the temperature of the air. "Maybe she's just lonely," Lily said. He stopped. "That's an interesting theory, Bug. Mrs. Paulson says mean people are mostly just sad people who forgot how to say it." She took a careful sip. "And you're always nicer to sad people than mean people, so maybe you're being mean back to her because you think she's mean. But really she's sad." Daniel looked at his daughter for a moment. He thought about what he knew of Victoria Sterling, which was mostly professional and almost entirely second-hand. Harvard MBA. Founded Aurora Tech at 29 with seed funding she had personally negotiated. No spouse on record. No children. No visible life outside the company, as far as any of her employees could tell. She attended industry events and was photographed occasionally at fundraisers. Always at the edges of photographs. Always facing slightly away, as though she had agreed to be present but not quite arrived. "You might be onto something," he said. Lily nodded, satisfied with herself. "I usually am." They walked home through the Christmas market on Columbia Street, and Lily selected a small carved wooden star that she said was for the mantel, and Daniel carried it in his coat pocket all the way home, and by the time he unlocked their front door and Lily threw herself onto the couch and demanded pasta for dinner, the day had receded to something he could hold at a manageable distance. His phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m. Rooftop garden. Tomorrow. Noon. VS*. He stood in the kitchen for a long time, reading it. He put Lily to bed at 10, later than he'd intended, because she had wanted 3 chapters of Times, The Secret Garden, instead of 2, and he had given them to her because he was constitutionally incapable of refusing her anything that involved books. After, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and the message still unread on his phone. His first instinct was to contact HR directly, flag the interaction, protect himself and his team. The kiss had been unprofessional, unambiguous, and documented by 7 witnesses. He had grounds. He had standing. His second instinct was to go to the rooftop garden. He recognized the second instinct as the more dangerous one, which made it very difficult to dismiss. He typed Times Victoria Sterling into the browser and spent an hour reading things he had only half known before. There was a long profile in a business magazine from 2019, before Aurora Tech had become large enough to generate the kind of press that turned CEOs into archetypes. In it, she talked about building the company's early culture. The late nights, the conviction that the work itself was enough, the deliberate choice to structure her life around output rather than attachment. I don't think ambition and softness are incompatible, she had said. I think they require different schedules. There was an older piece, from a small tech publication, that mentioned, briefly and without elaboration, that she had grown up in Connecticut. That her father had been an engineer, that her mother had worked 2 jobs to fund Victoria's education after the family's money problems began. The article didn't pursue the thread. Victoria clearly hadn't allowed it to. He closed the laptop. He replied to the message. Okay. Then he lay in his bed in the dark and listened to the faint sound of Lily breathing in the next room, and he thought about loneliness, about the specific loneliness of people who are so competent that no one bothers to ask if they're all right, because it seems obvious that they are. He knew that loneliness. He had lived in it for 2 years after his marriage ended, moving through his days with perfect external function while something essential had quietly gone cold inside him. He thought about what it would look like, that loneliness, if it had been given 20 years instead of 2. He slept poorly and woke early and made Lily's lunch and braided her hair badly and walked her to school in the light snow and arrived at Aurora Tech at 8:30, 3 minutes before Marcus Webb stopped him in the lobby to say that HR had been informed and that a formal process was being initiated and that Daniel was not in any trouble but should expect to be contacted for a statement. "And Miss Sterling?" Daniel asked. Marcus's expression was careful. "Has already submitted hers." The garden on the 52nd floor was Aurora Tech's most photographed feature, a press release fixture, a thing that appeared in every Times Best Workplace Roundup and every investor deck. In December, it was also largely empty. The planters had been wrapped in burlap for the winter, and the raised beds of herbs and seasonal flowers had retreated to brown sticks. But someone had strung lights through the pergola, and the views were unobstructed, and the snow was falling lightly. And it was, Daniel admitted to himself as he pushed through the glass door, genuinely beautiful. Victoria was standing at the railing on the north side, looking at the city. She had her coat on, which meant she had come up recently, and she was holding a coffee cup that appeared to be empty. She heard him and turned. She looked different up here. Still herself, the set of her shoulders, the contained quality of her attention, but the context had changed. And context, Daniel knew, was most of what a person is. "I've reported the incident to HR myself," she said, before he could speak. "I'm prepared to accept whatever formal process they determine is appropriate, including stepping back from operational oversight of your division, or more, if that's what's required." "I know," he said. "Marcus told me." She nodded and looked back at the city for a moment, and then said very quietly, "I don't have an explanation that would satisfy an HR policy. I have a reason. I'm not sure it helps. Tell me anyway." She turned the empty coffee cup in her hands. It was a nervous gesture, small and incongruous, and it was the first time he had ever seen her make one. "You've been fighting me for 2 years," she said. "Every major decision, every policy I've implemented that you thought was wrong. Every meeting where the consensus went one way and you went the other." She paused. "Do you know how many people in this building disagree with me? I imagine quite a few." "0, she said. To my face. 0. He was quiet. "Not because they agree," she continued. "Because they don't want to lose their jobs, or their standing, or whatever it is they think they'd lose by pushing back on me." She set the coffee cup on the railing. "You're the only person in this building who actually talks to me, who says the thing that's real instead of the thing that's safe." And yesterday she stopped, started again. Yesterday you said something true, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I made a choice that I cannot defend professionally. But I need you to understand that it wasn't a power move. It wasn't meant to silence you or intimidate you or claim something I haven't earned." She looked at him. "I don't entirely know what it was. I've been trying to work that out since yesterday afternoon." Daniel leaned against the railing beside her. Not close, a respectful distance, a colleague's distance. "Why did you kiss me?" he asked. "Because," she said slowly, "for the first time in longer than I can accurately calculate, I felt something that wasn't about the company. And I panicked, and I handled it very badly." The snow was steady now, light and directionless, the kind that suggests rather than insists. Below them, the city moved in its millions. "I'm not angry," Daniel said. She looked at him. "I should probably be angry," he said. "I've been going over it, trying to manufacture the appropriate amount of outrage. I can't quite get there." He looked at his hands on the railing. "I think you might be lonely. I think you've been lonely for a very long time, and it's made you hard in ways you didn't initially intend. And I don't think that makes what you did acceptable. It doesn't, but I think I understand the territory it came from." Victoria Sterling looked at him for a long time. "Your daughter," she said finally. "The drawing in the corner of your monitor. How old is she?" 7. "She has good instincts," Victoria said, though she had never met her, and he understood, somehow, that she was simply perceiving the fact of Lily's existence as evidence of something she couldn't quite name. "She thinks you're lonely too," Daniel said. Victoria blinked. Something crossed her face, surprise, and then, briefly, something that might have been grief, and then the careful neutral again. "She said that?" "She said mean people are mostly just sad people who forgot how to say it." Victoria looked away. Her jaw worked. "She's 7, she said finally. "She's very 7, Daniel agreed. "I can't take credit for her." A pause. Below them, a bus rounded a corner in silence. "Maybe," Victoria said, carefully, as though each word needed to be tested before she committed to it. "There's a way forward that doesn't require either of us to pretend yesterday didn't happen." "I was thinking the same thing," Daniel said. "I have no idea what that looks like. Neither do I. That's probably a reasonable place to start." They stayed on the rooftop for another 40 minutes, because neither of them left. And eventually the cold made conversation easier than the alternative. Daniel told her about his marriage. Not the summary version, the polished, time-compressed edition he deployed at parties and in new friendships. He told her the actual version, the accumulating distance, the way love doesn't always end dramatically, but sometimes simply runs out of oxygen and goes quiet. The way he had discovered, in the aftermath, that he had confused being capable with being whole. That carrying everything alone had felt like strength until the day it felt like a cage. Lily had made the afterward worth living. That wasn't sentiment, it was the most accurate thing he knew. Victoria listened. She was an excellent listener, he realized, in the way of people for whom listening was a learnable skill rather than an instinct, deliberate, attentive, giving the impression that what he said was being retained at high fidelity. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Then," she said, "my mother worked 2 jobs from the time I was 9 until I left for college. My father was charming when he wanted to be, good in rooms full of people, unreliable with everything else." She said this without apparent emotion, but her hands on the railing were still. She sacrificed everything for a marriage that didn't deserve it, and she was proud of that sacrifice. She called it love. I think she believed it. A pause. "I swore, at some point, that I would never structure my life around a thing I couldn't control. That control was the safeguard, the only one that actually held. And the safeguard works," she said. "It just empties things out. I didn't realize how empty until you called me cruel yesterday, and I recognized it was the first honest thing anyone had said to me in this building in about 3 years. I didn't call you cruel. You implied it. I said cruelty. I meant the outcome, not the intention." Is there a difference? He thought about it seriously. I think intention matters, even when the outcome doesn't reflect it. It's what tells you whether the person is capable of doing better. She absorbed this. And you think I'm capable of doing better? I think you built an entire company, he said. I think that requires a fairly significant amount of capability. Something changed in her face. Not dramatically, a slight softening around the eyes, a relaxation so small it might have been visible only to someone who had spent 2 years watching her across conference tables. The HR process, she said. I want to be transparent with you about what I've proposed. I've suggested a structural adjustment so that your division reports to Philip going forward rather than directly to me. It removes the formal power differential. Anything beyond that, any personal dimension, would be separate, disclosed appropriately, managed with discretion. You thought it through. I think most things through, she said. And for the first time, the smallest suggestion of something that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. I know, he said. It's one of the maddening things about you. One of, she said. Presumably, there are others. We could be here a while. We have the time, she said. And then, as if surprised by her own words. The formal process took 4 days. Daniel gave his statement on Friday. 2 investigators from HR, a woman named Renata Shields, who had the quiet authority of someone who had navigated complex workplace situations for many years, and a younger colleague taking detailed notes, asked him careful, non-leading questions, and listened to his answers with professional neutrality. He told the truth. He described the sequence of events accurately, including his own role in escalating the tension of the meeting. He noted that he had not felt threatened or coerced. He noted that the incident had been witnessed and documented. He said that he believed Miss Sterling had already taken voluntary steps to address the situation, and that he did not wish to pursue formal disciplinary measures, and that his primary concern had been, and remained, the working conditions of his team. Renata Shields noted all of this without comment. The structural adjustment was confirmed the following Monday. Daniel's division would report to Philip Drake, the COO, effective immediately. This was presented to the creative team as a routine organizational realignment, and because Philip was well-liked and competent, it was received without significant disruption. Victoria called a leadership meeting that Tuesday and said, in front of the full senior team, I have made changes to the reporting structure of the creative division. These changes reflect an organizational priority rather than a performance assessment. And Daniel Hayes and his team continue to have my full confidence and support. She paused. I also want to say, to this group, that the feedback raised in last week's meeting about team capacity and sustainable working conditions is feedback this organization will be taking seriously. I'm commissioning a full review of project timeline methodology, starting with the Solstice launch. Philip will lead that process. Philip looked mildly startled. Then he nodded. Personal lives, Victoria added, her voice entirely level, will not affect our professionalism. That is a standard I am committed to maintaining, and I expect the same of everyone in this room. She looked at no one in particular, and everyone in general, and then the meeting continued, and that was that. Later, Sandra Ellison found Daniel by the coffee machine and said, very quietly, she did that herself, without being asked. Daniel said, equally quietly, I know. That's not nothing, Sandra said. No, he said. It isn't. The Solstice launch happened on December 21st, revised timeline and all. Philip's review had produced a series of practical adjustments, phased deliverables, a 48-hour buffer before final production, mandatory off hours for the creative team in the final week. The campaign Daniel's team had built was reworked in one crucial area, the tagline. The new version, arrived at in a session that Daniel had quietly invited Victoria to observe rather than lead, was Time's Your Light, shaped by you. It was specific. It was honest. It distinguished the product. It tested at 91% positive association in the consumer panels, which Daniel did not mention to Victoria because he did not want to be insufferable about it. The launch went well, better than well. The retail partnership held. The investors expressed satisfaction. The review coverage was strong. On December 22nd, a Tuesday, Daniel arrived at his desk to find a small envelope. Inside was a card, no corporate letterhead, just plain white cardstock. In neat, undecorated handwriting, *dinner, Wednesday the 23rd, 7 p.m. You choose the address. Below that, a personal phone number and the initial times V. *. He stood at his desk for a while, holding the card. Then he texted Mrs. Paulson to ask if she could watch Lily on Wednesday evening, and she replied within 4 minutes with 3 separate heart emojis and the words, "Times, it's about time, sweetheart," which he chose not to interrogate. On the evening of December 23rd, at 7 o'clock, Daniel Hayes rang the buzzer of a building on West 62nd Street, and Victoria Sterling answered through the intercom and said, "Come up," and when the elevator opened on the top floor, the door to the penthouse was already open and something was cooking. The apartment was unexpected. He realized he had imagined something like her office. Clean lines, minimal color. The aggressive tidiness of someone who controlled their environment as a matter of principle. Instead, there were books. Books on every horizontal surface, stacked without apparent system. Paperbacks alongside hardcovers, recent acquisitions beside things that clearly hadn't been touched in years. There was a couch that had been lived on. There were 2 dead orchids on the windowsill that she clearly hadn't had the heart to throw away. There was a rug that was slightly the wrong size for the room. It was a home. It was, improbably, a home. "You look surprised," she said, emerging from the kitchen in a dark sweater. Sleeves pushed to the elbows, holding a wooden spoon with suspicious confidence. "A little. Good. Sit down." She gestured toward the kitchen island. "I should tell you I'm a competent cook. Not exceptional. Competent. Honestly, that's a relief. Exceptional cooks are stressful to eat with." She gave him the look, the measured, assessing look, and then said, "That is probably true." She turned back to the stove. "Wine is on the counter." He poured 2 glasses and sat at the island and watched her cook, and it was one of the more unusual experiences he had had recently, which was saying something given the week he'd had. Victoria Sterling at a stove was not a different person. She was still precise, still focused, still economical in her movements. But the focus was on something real and immediate and edible, and the stakes were appropriately low, and she seemed to find this acceptable. They talked through dinner. He told her about Lily, not the careful, public version, but the actual one. Her opinions, her observations, her habit of narrating her own life in the third person when she was tired, the way she fell asleep mid-sentence and then denied it in the morning. Victoria listened with the same quality of attention she gave everything, but this time it was unmistakably warm. "She sounds extraordinary," Victoria said. "She's ordinary," Daniel said. "In every specific way, she's a regular 7-year-old who likes pasta and hates having her hair brushed and reads above her grade level and tells me I'm being dramatic. And she is completely extraordinary." Victoria looked at him. "You love her in the way I used to think was too simple to be enough. What changed your mind?" "Being in the same building as it for 2 years," she said. "Watching you leave to pick her up. Watching the drawing in the corner of your monitor." She turned her wine glass. "I used to find it not irritating, exactly. Destabilizing. It made the rest of the office feel like a stage set." "It is a stage set," he said. "All of it is." "I know," she said quietly. After dinner, he helped her clear the table, and she made coffee, and they sat in the living room with the window open a crack, the cold air coming in soft and bearing snow, the city below them a warm algebra of lights. She had a record player, actual vinyl, an old machine with a worn felt mat, and she put something on that he didn't recognize. Something gentle and instrumental, and they sat with it for a while without needing to fill the space. "I wanted a family," she said. Not sadly, just as a statement of fact, a piece of information offered without agenda. "When I was younger, I thought I would want it differently than my mother did on my own terms, without the dependency, without giving myself over completely. But I couldn't figure out how to want it at all once the company took over. By the time I looked up, I was 35, and the company was 4,000 people, and the wanting had just dried up somewhere. I couldn't find it anymore." "You didn't stop wanting it," Daniel said. "You just stopped believing you could have it without losing the thing you'd built." She looked at him. "Those are different problems," he said. "The second one is solvable." Outside, the snow was falling steadily now. The city lights diffused through it into something softer, less geometric, more like memory than geography. She set her coffee cup down. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Whatever this is, I am genuinely, practically uncertain how to do it. I want that on record." "I don't need you to know," he said. "I don't know either. I've been a single dad for 2 years, and I've been fighting my CEO for most of that time, and I have no idea what happens next. What I know is that the not knowing is less terrifying at this specific moment than it was yesterday." "That's a very low bar." "It's December," he said. "I'm working with what I have." She laughed. It was a real laugh, brief, unguarded. A sound he had never heard from her in any conference room or any corridor of Aurora Tech Tower. He realized, with a mild shock, that he had been trying to make her laugh for 2 years without knowing that was what he was doing. She stood and walked to the window and looked out at the city, and he came to stand beside her. Not touching, not yet. That distance between them had weight and meaning, and neither of them was in a hurry to collapse it carelessly. "The drawing," she said, "in the corner of your monitor. The house with the yellow door. Lily drew it last spring." "I know. I've walked past your desk approximately 200 times." She was quiet. "I used to think it was unprofessional. Personal items in the workspace, it muddies the clarity. I had a whole internal argument about it, and I kept not saying anything. Because every time I was about to, I looked at it instead. And then I would think about," she stopped. "Something I couldn't name." The snow outside was heavy now, muffling the city, softening its edges. Below, someone had lit the windows of the building across the street, and the frames of golden light fell in patterns on the street below, mixed with the white. She turned and looked at him. He kissed her this time. Gently. Nothing like the boardroom, no anger in it, no frustration, no accumulated argument. Just deliberate and warm and honest. When they separated, she rested her forehead briefly against his, and neither of them said anything. Because some things don't need language. They just need the space to exist. "Your daughter," she said, eventually, quietly. "Tell me something she told you recently." Something small, he thought. "Last week, she informed me that clouds are just sky puddles waiting to happen." Victoria pulled back and looked at him. Something in her eyes was completely open. Undefended, the specific unguardedness of someone who has stopped calculating the cost. "She's correct," Victoria said. "That's exactly what they are." Outside, the snow fell through the lights of the city, and New York in December did what it always did. It forgave you for whatever you had been before you arrived here. In this cold, in this particular night, in the company of someone who had finally decided to stop fighting and start toward you instead. 2 strong people who had spent years mistaking their armor for their character. 2 long winters, each one survived alone. Finally letting the thaw begin.